Bitcoin back over $100,000. What's the ripple effect? Let's ask Ben McMillan of IDX Advisors, and I'm Lisa Bernhard with Reuters. Ben, you are in very early on Bitcoin. What does a big number like that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because it's a big psychological threshold. I mean, to your point, I remember having a discussion with a buddy in the industry back when Bitcoin was below $1,000, and there was talk about could it ever go to 100K, and it just seemed like pie in the sky back then, and now all of a sudden here it is. And so that's important. I mean, it's a very these psychological thresholds are very meaningful. I think it's also emblematic of kind of the shift that we've seen in the regulatory posture. So it's not just all fluff. There's kind of meaningful changes under the hood that have driven this latest bull run that I think are very bullish, going forward for Bitcoin.
There's news today that MicroStrategy, which is a money-losing software firm, could enter the NASDAQ 100 based on its Bitcoin holdings. That seems pretty wild to me. Explain that and what that would mean for Bitcoin if, in fact, it does make the NASDAQ 100.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So MicroStrategy, for those that don't know, actually goes back to the dot-com era. So Michael Saylor, the founder and CEO of MicroStrategies, was one of the original dot-com billionaires, and he was an early buyer, early advocate of Bitcoin. And MicroStrategy's as an operating company had kind of wound down, but as he started buying more Bitcoin, it became essentially a proxy for Bitcoin before any of these ETFs were launched. I was actually at a private dinner at Michael Saylor's house earlier this year, and he very clearly laid out his argument for why he first bought it, why he thinks it's going to 1 million. We're very early in the adoption curve, and so MicroStrategy's primary goal is to acquire Bitcoin. He's most recently taken out a convertible, taken out debt at the company level to buy Bitcoin. So that was one of the reasons that it's up, I think, over 500% this year, which of course now puts it in the realm. If you were to look strictly at the criteria for being eligible for the NASDAQ 100, MicroStrategy checks all the boxes. So what's interesting is to see whether or not the index committee relies purely on that criteria and in fact puts it in the NASDAQ 100, which of course, some of the biggest ETFs track, or if they, kind of put their thumb on the scales a little bit and come up with some exception for why it's, not eligible in this case. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what the NASDAQ Index Committee does with that.
This week, there was a big Bitcoin MENA conference, and correct me if I said that wrong, in Abu Dhabi. Eric Trump spoke there. What was the biggest takeaway from that conference?
Yeah, Eric Trump said Bitcoin is going to 1 million. That got all the headlines. And again, like I said, I mean, that does coincide with what Michael Saylor has said. To me, the biggest takeaway, though, is first of all how well attended the conference was. Abu Dhabi has made no secret of the fact that they want to be kind of the global Bitcoin hub, and I think a lot of that, frankly, was drafting in the wake of excessive regulations here in the U.S. that were kind of stifling innovation. So I think they had several thousand participants, something like, close to 100 countries participating. So I think that was interesting. The other thing was there was a big presentation, a big deep dive about El Salvador's use case for Bitcoin. So again, going back to, Bitcoin having real world use cases, El Salvador, as a developing country, has a very interesting one where they basically kind of, used Bitcoin as, for lack of a better term, central bank in a box. And, I've been saying for years now, we talked about it last time we chatted, that I think this is going to be a use case that we see more and more developing countries adopt. And so I think the fact that that was showcased at the MENA conference was really interesting.